Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Injury Law Pod. I am your host, Eric Bartlett, 29-year personal injury lawyer, and this is the podcast where we talk about all things personal injury law related. And up today, did you know October is National Pedestrian Safety Month? And something I think a lot of us just take for granted. We walk around the streets, the sidewalks, and we obviously plan to do so in a safe manner, not be hit by a vehicle or encounter some other hazard out there. But unfortunately, every year there are a lot of pedestrian accidents. And now is an ideal time to talk about risk for pedestrians, cyclists, scooter riders, and especially children. Recently, we've had a couple of really bad situations here in the Kansas City area. And so it's a good time to highlight the dangers that are out there and what we can do to try to avoid them. And unfortunately, if it happens to you or someone you know, then what that looks like legally. But again, every day there's pedestrian incidents. I literally just got a call this morning from a man who was hit by a vehicle in a crosswalk. The vehicle left the scene. We are working to try to figure out this vehicle, if we can identify it. There's some video out there that might be useful. And between either our involvement or the police, hopefully we can get it figured out. But an interesting wrinkle, the crosswalk signals had actually been out at this intersection for about a month. And so then the question becomes, is this not only a claim against this driver, but has the city put people at risk by not having working crosswalk signals, which, according to the information we have, had been out for about a month? So, anyway, these things unfold in a lot of different ways. And so, we're just going to break it all down, take a look, and try to give information. We're going to talk about Missouri and Kansas City area accidents that have involved children here recently. Again, the legal implications, preventive tips, and what families and drivers need to know. So, again, couple of local recent stories, really tragic. A 9-year-old girl here in Kansas City was riding a bicycle in a marked crosswalk. She was struck by a van that was turning left. She had a green light, and unfortunately, she died as a result of this collision. And so this happened down at Longview Road and Food Lane in the southern part of the city. And again, she was in the crosswalk, and it's just something that is tragic, but it's preventable. And then the second one that's been in the news recently was a child that was on an electric scooter, again, here in Kansas City, was hit by a vehicle. And not only does this raise the issues and concerns about pedestrian safety, but also scooter safety concerns, especially for younger riders, and what we need to be thinking about when we put our kids on those. And then finally, in early October, something that had come across some of the socials, especially TikTok, there were two college aged women in the Memphis area. They were struck by a vehicle while walking near a roadway. And although they were expected to survive, the injuries are severe, and the case is under an active investigation. And again, while the official report is not yet released, some of the key facts that have come out of it: the women were walking along a public road, a vehicle approached, the impact occurred, and the driver is now subject to investigation for potential negligent operation or failure to yield to these pedestrians. And again, these aren't children or toddlers. They were young adults. They were walking in what many assume is a safe zone. And that means every pedestrian, regardless of age, has exposure. And again, the person I talked to this morning, that's an adult man. And again, crossing in the crosswalk, but unfortunately was hit by a car that did not yield. So again, these aren't just driver versus pedestrian. These are rolling modes, air quotes, meaning it can be scooters, it can be bicycles. All of this adds complexity to the situation, but children are especially vulnerable, as we all might imagine. While one story straddles the Kansas Missouri metro, it's relevant for all of Missouri families, Kansas families, again, municipalities and attorneys alike, just to be aware of the dangers and what the legal avenues look like coming out of these. But what these accidents tell us about liability, infrastructure, and driver responsibility is really critical in moving forward in trying to, again, prevent these injuries or these deaths from ever occurring. And then, unfortunately, if they do, what does compensation look like when that happens? So, essentially, again, if we're looking at Missouri law, the basics for pedestrians, cyclists, scooter riders are that there's a duty of care by drivers, and they must look out for pedestrians. They must obey crosswalk laws. They must share the road with bicycles. Bicycles, under law, have the right to be on the street. Now, again, bicyclists, they have responsibilities as well. When you're operating a bicycle on a street, you have to stop at stop signs or red lights. You have to do the same yielding that is required of a vehicle. You can't just be out there willy-nillying it and thinking you own the road, because you don't. You are under the same obligations. I personally have commuted on and off to my office, really for a matter of about 5 years in total. And as someone on a bicycle that has been on streets many times, I'm aware of the dangers. I'm aware that vehicles don't always see you. And I'm also very conscientious about how important it is to obey traffic laws, because you cannot be out there running stop signs, taking up an entire lane and things like that, and then blame a vehicle if something happens. So again, Missouri, I talk about this all the time. It's a comparative fault state. So if you're hurt and you're a pedestrian, a bicyclist, you're on a scooter, whatever that looks like, and you share in fault and you're trying to make a claim against another driver, that can certainly weigh against you and could totally prevent you from any recovery that you might have. But the nice thing is, as well, if there's fault on both sides, that doesn't completely prevent you from recovery. And again, those are the intricacies of the law that it takes a personal injury lawyer to really fully understand, and then see how they can help a person that's been hurt in this type of an accident. But again, there's a duty of care for drivers, and then there's an infrastructure municipality liability. Like I just talked about with the gentleman that has reached out to us, the crosswalk signal was not working. Apparently, that's been the situation for about a month. There's questions about, did the city know about this? Did they not act timely to get that working again, which at least in theory would have provided another mechanism to alert other drivers that this pedestrian had the right of way in the crosswalk. So again, we're always going to be looking at those things. The other part of that is, our crosswalks properly marked for safe travel by pedestrians? Is the signal timing correct? So the pedestrian gets the signal to cross. Does that match up with the lights for the vehicles to stop? And also sidewalk maintenance. Again, pedestrians are largely going to be on sidewalks. Are these sidewalks in good repair? Or has the city somehow failed to maintain the sidewalks? Those types of things. All of that comes into play in these types of situations. And then with, again, scooters, bicycles, those types of things, again, it's important to figure out how they're classified under Missouri law or maybe even local ordinances. And again, what counts as a scooter? Is a helmet in place? Is it required? All of these things. And again, in some of these local articles about these recent accidents, they've noted the increased injuries that are being seen for bike and scooter accidents in the KC area. So essentially, just like many other personal injury claims, especially if you're thinking about like a car accident, things like that, evidence is always going to be critical. And so, again, if we're hired, we're immediately investigating, seeing what the evidence looks like. Again, I can just continue to use this example from this morning, but we need to find out about maintenance on the crosswalk signal, see if the city had notice about the defective crosswalk signal. Again, evidence, video. I've already mentioned that there is video from someone's dash cam that captured the vehicle that hit and ran. And we think it might have the license plate of the driver that left the scene. All critical things to get together. Again, potentially the operation of the signals and making sure everything was functioning properly so that when a pedestrian has the right of way, that the other cars have a red light, things like that. Again, those could be important elements of evidence that could be needed down the road. And then finally, roadway surface conditions. When we get contacted and somebody says that they were hurt because of a dangerous condition of the property, one of our immediate jobs is to go out and get photographs of the scene, video of the scene, take measurements, things like that. Because if it gets repaired, then it's gone forever. And so it makes it very hard to pursue that claim. So again, we always ask the people that were hurt, does anybody, you or anybody have pictures? But we always want to get there because we usually do a much more in-depth photographic evidence taking task to make sure we've gotten all the angles, we've done measurements, things like that. Because if we're going to hire an engineer, a code specialist, whatever that looks like, they're going to want all that information. And again, a lot of times these things get repaired and the defect is gone forever at that point. You only get one bite at that apple. Obviously, when that repair happens, it's done. Just like this child bicyclist, one of the stories that came out of here recently, even with the green light and being in the crosswalk, a death has occurred. And so questions surround something like that. The van was turning left. So what was going on with the driver? Was the driver paying attention? Why didn't the driver see this child on the bicycle in the crosswalk? So that's a big question, right? Driver visibility. Was there anything obscuring the driver's view from seeing this bicyclist? And then you get into, was this a well-designed intersection? Again, there are engineers, there are people that their sole job is to design and implement these intersections so that they do provide the safest means of travel for not only vehicles, but also others using the intersection. And again, that obviously includes pedestrians, bicyclists, things of that nature. So all of these questions can come up in something that seems relatively straightforward, but actually isn't. And it requires somebody that really knows all the things to look at to figure out who all is responsible here for this happening. And again, with the scooter rider that I've mentioned, again, visibility, the age of the rider, the vehicle versus scooter differences, and whether the sidewalk or the street was again designed well, and was the scooter rider any kind of protective gear to try to help avoid a much more serious accident. And again, the laws are pretty relaxed, especially for bicyclists and things like that. In Missouri, depending on if you meet the requirements, you don't have to have a helmet for a motorcycle. Bicycles, things like that are certainly right there. You don't have to wear a helmet. I'm going to be the first one to tell you, you absolutely positively should be wearing a helmet if you're out on the streets on a bicycle, a scooter, or anything else, because again, you never know where danger lurks. So, what kinds of claims come out of an accident like this? Obviously, personal injury. So, if someone's hurt and there's medical bills, and maybe there's lost time from work, things like that. Just again, the same stuff you would see coming out of a car versus car accident. You're going to have the same sorts of injuries and damages that come out of that. Again, there could be a wrongful death claim when someone is killed. And again, there can be catastrophic injury. You got to look at potential claims of negligence against the driver, potential claims of negligence against a municipality for a defective roadway, and again, possible municipal liability in other respects as well. So we always remember in Missouri, you have 5 years to make that claim when someone is injured. Kansas, you have 2 years. And for wrongful death in Missouri, you have 3 years to make a wrongful death claim. So again, you have time, but what I always say is you should not wait because evidence gets lost quickly. Insurance companies potentially get involved. And when all of that comes together, that's a recipe for becoming a very difficult case to prove. So the quicker you act, the quicker evidence is preserved, the quicker you're making sure your medical treatment is on track and you're not getting gaps in your treatment, anything like that, all very important if you're going to be making a claim against someone for injuries and damages. So, how do we work to prevent these accidents in the first place? Again, if you're a family, your parents, and you're going to have children out riding scooters, bicycles, things like that, obviously you've got to work with them and teach them safe habits, right? Use sidewalks when appropriate. Again, if they're going to be out walking around, sidewalks, crosswalks, very important. What's interesting is with bicycles, you actually don't want to ride your bicycle on a sidewalk. All the authorities say that a bicycle really should be on the street. And here's why. Because if you're riding down a sidewalk and that sidewalk intersects with driveways, people can be backing out of their driveway and not really expecting or anticipating the bicyclist to be coming along on the sidewalk, and that can lead to a crash. However, generally speaking, people, as they're backing out of a driveway, once they get to the street, they're going to be stopping, hopefully, certainly yielding, checking their surroundings to make sure cars aren't coming. And at that point, hopefully, they would see a bicycle on the roadway. So again, that's just one of the safety tips that authorities put out there, that riding a bicycle on a sidewalk is not the safest option for the reason that I just mentioned. But again, as a parent, you've got to make the decision. Is my child old enough, competent enough? Is my child going to be seen if they're on a bicycle on the street? That's a big deal because the street is right there with the cars, and decisions and judgment has to be made about whether that's suitable for the age of the child. The other key part, and I know this again from riding on the streets, is you have to make sure a driver sees you if you're on a bike or a scooter or whatever that looks like. You cannot assume a driver sees you. And there have been many instances, again, I can speak personally, where I'm approaching a street, an intersection. I have the right of way, I have no stop sign, the other person does. And I will tell you, I'm always watching that car as I approach with my hands ready on the brakes because numerous times I've had people come on out, whether they didn't see me, whether they thought they could make it across before I would ever get there, whatever that looks like, it doesn't happen. And this is the same thing we see with motorcycles. A lot of people, they either don't see the motorcyclist or they misjudge the speed of the motorcycle because it's a smaller vehicle and they think it's moving maybe at a slower pace than it truly is, whatever that looks like. It's the same with bicycles. You've got to make sure if you're the bicycle rider, you are watching that vehicle and you make sure they see you. You cannot just trust that, oh, yeah, they're stopped. They see me, because you'll have people stopped and then all of a sudden they go and here you are locking up your bicycle. Very important. Again, I can't stress enough, wear helmets, safety gear, things like that. When I commuted, I always wore a bright little yellow vest over my clothes, just again to stand out better. Lights on the bicycle, things like that. Anything that can bring attention to you is going to be a step in the right direction. And again, with scooters, if your kid is out there on the scooter, ensure that it's an age appropriate device. Don't put a little kid on a scooter that's rolling around the streets or the sidewalks, and they're simply too young to be doing so safely. So, all good things to think about. And also, dusk, dawn, and again, as the days are getting shorter on us all the time here in October, again, wearing reflective gear, lights, bright colors, whatever you can do, because again, we're going to have more dark than we are light. And so it's really important. Another good thing to think about, again, with bicycles or scooters, there may be times where you need to treat your bicycle or your scooter like a vehicle or a pedestrian, and there might even be local laws that dial in on that a little more. Slow down near traffic, dismount in crosswalks if it's required. And it may not even be a bad idea to just do that where you're on the ground. You have a little bit more mobility in case somebody is doing something. But again, just things to think about. And for drivers, hey, great things to think about. Slow down in school zones. There's a reason there's school zone speed limits. Be mindful of crosswalks, residential streets, watch for children on bikes and scooters, especially near schools or parks, or obviously the places that kids very well may be hanging out. Avoid left turns without checking for bikes or pedestrians. You always want to yield in those crosswalks. Again, you're making a left turn. You want to make sure you see who or what is in the crosswalk coming across. And the same, honestly, with a right turn, because as you make a right turn, if the pedestrian has the green light to cross, you've got to yield to that pedestrian in the crosswalk. And they start going when you're ready to start going, and that can lead to a collision. So, again, just things to think about. Again, be extra cautious in these low light hours or dark and during the transitions of the season. Again, just be extra cautious in low light hours as it's getting darker quicker and during the transitions of the seasons. You just want to be careful and again, pay extra attention to the roadway. And always don't be on your phone. Can I say that enough? Again, we always hope and assume that our cities are designing these intersections appropriately, safely, all those things. But again, there's a real importance to the infrastructure and clearly marked sidewalks, signal timing, signals working, sidewalk maintenance, dedicated bike and scooter lanes. I've talked about that before. And that you gotta hope, and hopefully your city is doing those things to make it safer out there for pedestrians and bicyclists. The local news story noted that the hospitals had treated 467 children for bike and scooter injuries between June of 24 and July of this year in the Casey area alone. And so, again, that just emphasizes the dangers that go with these forms of transportation. And again, especially as it involves children. You can always learn more if you start searching around on the internet for public safety campaigns that educate riders, drivers, local ordinances on, again, bicycles and scooters, things like that, any helmet rules, posted signage. We'll drop a couple links here, but it never hurts to get involved and really dive into this, especially if you're going to be a bicyclist, a pedestrian, or you're going to have your children out there doing that. So, as a part of Pedestrian Safety Month, I would just encourage you to engage. And maybe it's even with your kids' schools. Just find out, are there school based safety programs? Are there any community efforts? Things like that. You can always go to the city council. You can speak there about safe crossings. Obviously, if there's situations where there need to be better crossing guards for school areas. And I think one of the local stories here recently involves that. The fact that there's several residential streets that kids are crossing and there's not school guards in place. Those things, unfortunately, as parents, sometimes we have to force those issues and make sure others are doing everything to protect our kids. And so I just encourage you, this is a great time to get involved and make sure your community is safe for bicyclists, pedestrians, and children. So, incidents like I talked about at the top of the episode, there's just two recent situations. They underscore the real risk that's involved when children and people are on the roadways, sharing those roadways with vehicles. And again, drivers, families, and communities all play a role in providing a safe transportation mode for all of us that are using these roadways in all the different forms. And again, from a legal perspective, again, prompt attention, correct classification of the device that's involved, whether it's a bike or a scooter, the infrastructure and the driver liability, all that is so critical when we're faced with this type of a situation. And again, those are the things on the front side that we're hopeful have been put into place that are working in unison to create a safe atmosphere. But again, when I get involved, unfortunately, it's on the back end. And then I'm looking at where the failures were, who's responsible for this tragic situation. But again, on the front side with this podcast, you can be empowered to go out there and make a real difference in the way your community operates when it comes to bicycles, scooters, and pedestrians. So, as always, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. And if you want to learn more again about what cities are doing with their infrastructure to try to make the streets and the intersection safer, I'd encourage you go watch this video that I did. And otherwise, till next time, be safe and be well.